The Philadelphia Eagles look to start a winning streak when they head to MetLife Stadium to take on the New York Giants. While the Eagles have had success over the Giants in recent years, they were lucky to split the series against them last year, and they've been a tough team to start the year. Welcome to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with my co host, Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters, and today we are going to be discussing everything Giants and Eagles. But before we get to that, of course, let's hear Eric's thoughts on the Browns game.
And this is something I mentioned in the preview pod that even if the Eagles win in dominant fashion, I'm not going to be over the moon because I saw how inept the Browns were. And that's the feeling I got. Their offense can't function, and now they've traded away their best receiver. But there were a few positives. The main takeaways I had were Fangio listened to Huff and Sweat and allowed them to play from a 3 and 4 point stance. And you did a great job of recapping how their get off times improved dramatically. I think that's here to stay. Now, you may ask, why didn't they do that earlier? You may not have as much disguise if they do drop in coverage, but I think that's something we're willing to live with because they're desperate for pass rush. And Cooper DeJean. It was clear to me that it was an upgrade over Maddox. I do agree with you that if he gets isolated on quick receivers in man coverage, he will be exposed. And that actually might be pertinent for the game we're about to discuss. But I'm encouraged. And ultimately, he's a second round pick. You got to get him on the field, right? Sometimes there's growing pains, but without the reps, they're never going to get better. So I'm glad they got him out there now. And so now he's got, 10 more games to improve if hopefully we make the playoffs. On offense, it was great that Hurts didn't turn the ball over. AJ Brown looks like AJ Brown. And it looked like Kellen Moore kind of got back to his bag a little bit now that they did have the weapons, which was great to see. So listen, this is something we said last week. I'm comfortable that they'll be a top 10 offense with all their weapons there. And so to me, it's more just having a little bit more drive to drive consistency. The run game wasn't quite as potent in this past game, but look, the Browns are a solid defense. So overall, it was encouraging. But yeah, I just got to see more evidence that the defense is actually improved before I'm optimistic.
Yeah, you definitely need to see this against better competition, but they did what they should have done against bad competition, and they dominated them for most of the game, especially defensive-wise. Now, looking at this upcoming matchup with Cooper DeJean, he might be tested a little bit here, right? So let's look at this Giants offense. This offense is led by offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, though Brian Daboll, the head coach, has a huge part in the offense. It's quarterbacked by Daniel Jones and headlined by names like Malik Nabers. And really, that's it for the big names, especially now that Andrew Thomas has gone down. And it really speaks to the talent on the offensive side of the ball for the Giants. But they're 29th in points per game, 20th in yards per game, and 24th in EPA per play. So, Eric, what did you see from this Giants offense on the film?
Despite their advanced metrics looking really bad, and you talked about their talent deficit, and of course, Malik Nabers missed a few games, I actually liked watching their offense. They have, a good diversity of formations. They have creative use of motions, a lot of designer plays to get Nabers the ball in space, almost to a fault. They're clearly just, Daboll and Kafka are probably locking themselves in a room and just going for hours figuring out how can we get Nabers the ball in space. There's games where he had 18 targets. And if everyone knows you want to get it to this guy and you're still able to manufacture some good looks, that's impressive to me. And I think, not that I feel bad for Daboll, but if he had a really good personnel unit, I think that offense might cook a little bit. So it's pretty good. Now they do run some questionable stuff. Like there's this under center play where they get everyone on the line and then they just have two split receivers and it's a play action and they run down the field and run comebacks, and they actually were able to march down the field, but it was just very vanilla. And I think this is a theme in what we talked about the Tampa Bay offense, how they looked vanilla on film, and now they're putting up 30, 40 points on everyone. So ultimately, how well your timing is, how well your players are actually playing in space. Are they getting a lot of yards after catch? Are you avoiding turnovers? Are you converting in the red zone? Those all add up to mean more than like a really creative play calls and stuff like this. But yeah, it was pretty fun to watch their offense scheme wise. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Listen, this, like you said, you hit the nail on the head. This offense runs through Malik Nabers when he is healthy. Now, he is coming back from a concussion. He's been out the past 2 games, so we'll have to see if he does make it back this game. I imagine the Giants are probably trying to be a little cautious with him since he is a young player, rookie. They're probably not going to be making a lot of noise this year if they do make the playoffs, and it's a long-term thing, so I think they're probably being a little cautious with him. I do think he will be back this week, though, but you have to make someone else beat you. But like you said, this coaching staff does a good job of putting their players into positions to make plays. Right. So I was seeing this last year when we were getting ready for the Giants game. A lot of the stuff that the Giants were doing, that Daboll was doing, are things that we wanted the Eagles offense to do. So if for whatever reason they end up getting rid of Daboll and Kafka, I'd want one of those 2 guys to be an offense coordinator for the Eagles at some point down the line. They do a lot of creative and fun stuff. But continuing on with the conversation, they are doing a much better job of protecting Daniel Jones this year. He's 20th in pressure rate, which isn't great. Sports Info Solutions has them at 32.8% pressure rate. PFF has them around the same. That's not a good number, but it's by far the best of Daniel Jones' career, and it really highlights the bad environments that he's been stuck in. I'm not saying Daniel Jones is a great quarterback, but when you put anyone in that kind of environment for their entire career, you can understand why he has developed the way that he has developed. And then you add in Andrew Thomas, their star left tackle, is now out for the season. We should probably start seeing these pressure rates start to creep up to where they were last year and the years before in his career as well. But they do a good mix of running shotgun and under center. They mix in RPOs and play actions. They use Daniel Jones' legs and the run game a lot, whether it's read options, draw plays, quarterback sweep plays. They're going to use him to stay ahead of the sticks. And it's really the first time we're going to see that from an offense this season. We did see a read option from Baker Mayfield on the goal line in the Bucs game. But I'm talking about extensive use of the quarterback in the run game. We're going to see that this week. They are struggling to run the ball overall, though. They're 29th in yards per carry, 25th in rushing yards over expectation per attempt, and 27th in yards before contact per attempt. They're also struggling to pass the ball as they're 24th in yards per attempt and 21st in EPA per pass. And that has led them to be behind the sticks a lot, which has led them to be one of the worst teams on third down. They're 21st in third down percentage, but they are first in fourth down attempts. So they will play 4 downs, right? So they aren't going to play just the 3 downs. They are going to try and play to get to 4th and short. So you have to be mindful of that. But to me, this really sets up as a situation where this defense can, and especially this defensive line again, can probably get after this quarterback, because this should be a situation where we're able to put the team in longer down and distance situations just because they're not all that great running the ball and they're just not a great offense overall. They're probably going to get behind the sticks just on their own, right? So that's just what I saw quickly on the offensive side. But did you have anything you wanted to add before I just jumped over to some of the player matchups to watch out for?
Yeah, I think the part of the reason their run game stinks, it's not because they have like really bad run game designs or anything. Their offensive line stinks. And frankly, and I'll be the first to admit this, I was advocating for signing Singletary this offseason because he was cheap and what I viewed as a pretty solid third down back. He's been really bad. And well, I'll give you the opportunity to talk about who filled in for him, but I'm not convinced that the run game can improve down the line, but that's been a huge factor limiting their offense. And then you get in some of these short yardage situations in the red zone and you can't run it at all, and you only have one elite pass catcher. Now it becomes tough. So that's kind of how I'd sum their offense up.
Yeah, the headwinds facing this offense are pretty strong. So you see why they're where they are in some of these metrics. But looking at some of these players, we have to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, QB1, Daniel Jones. We all know about Danny Dimes. He is a quarterback, right? But like I said, his environment has been tough. So I don't want to put all the blame on him, right? It's not all on him. I think he can make you pay if you let him as well, right? If you are going to go out there and play bad defense, he will make you pay. We've seen him take off for 80-yard runs against this Eagles defense before. Now, does he make it all the way to the end zone before tripping? No, but that's still a huge gain, right? So you have to make sure that you're keeping Daniel Jones contained in the pocket and then being sound in your run fits when they are running the ball, because they are going to use his legs to keep a positive box count for themselves. His on-target percentage is the second worst of his career, and it's 26 out of 36 quarterbacks this season. His adjusted completion percentage is 8th, interestingly, but that's in large part due to having the third highest drop rate of any quarterback. Now, part of the issue of having a high drop rate can be factored into throwing a lot of on-target passes. We saw this last week when Amari Cooper dropped a pass that was thrown too high. It's a pass he probably should have caught, yes, but also if the quarterback made his life easier, he probably would have caught the ball if you put it where he didn't have to jump up to make the catch. Now, that's something Daniel Jones also has an issue with. But he has the lowest turnover-worthy play percentage of his career and also the 11th fastest time to throw. He did face Fangio in 2023, and they fucked his ass up. 6 sacks, 11 pressures, 119 passing yards, and the offense had 85 rushing yards overall. Both backs were under 2.5 yards a carry, and the Dolphins won 31-16. So Fangio knows this Giants team. I mean, it's a bit different. They didn't have Malik Nabers last year, but I think he has an understanding of this offense. But what did you see from Daniel Jones?
I think he's playing with more confidence than I've seen in the past. And if I was dropping back and then I can actually see Malik Nabers running out there, I would have more confidence too. You mentioned that his time to throw is better than he's been historically, and you can see his decisiveness. And from what I've seen, I could attribute that a lot to the coaching. I'm sure Dable's like, this is a timing play. We got to get it to this guy when you hit the back of your drop. You can just see that they put an emphasis on timing. Now, that it can be a double-edged sword, because if you have a cornerback who recognizes what route combination is coming and you sit on it, and then you're like, I'm throwing this no matter what when I hit the back of my drop, well, and then you have a potential interception. You mentioned his running. I never think people will give him enough credit for his running. So much so that I think he's like borderline a running quarterback. Just in the past game when they didn't have Nabers, he ran for like 3 10-yard runs. So he'll run for first downs. He runs with speed and power. Not that elusive, but yeah, if you give him space, it's trouble. You know, I think he's much better than Deshaun Watson. I could tell you that. You mentioned it, that if you just have a coverage bust, he will make you pay. He was throwing 40-yard passes in stride to Slayton last week, and it had a real nice spiral on it. So he's capable of that. I think it's just like, is he going to string together, a dozen good games in a season? I just don't think he has the talent to do that, especially if he's forced to pass it if the Giants do get behind. So yeah, so overall I would say he's a mediocre quarterback, but I'm sure the big thing for him is making sure he doesn't turn it over, because at least that can keep their head above water.
And that's how they've been able to stay in games, because they've been pretty competitive this year. They've really been relying on the defense, not turning the ball over, running the ball, and just high completion percentage passes, are not pushing the ball down the field a whole lot. So I think they are trying to, not put their team in bad situations. If you don't turn the ball over, you have a good chance to stay in games, right? And they're doing that. Now, we've talked on him, Malik Nabers. Talked about it. He should be back from the concussion, but this guy has an insanely high target share rate when healthy. I think it was first in the league when he was playing. It might have been one of the highest ever in NFL history through his first 3 weeks of his career. Some crazy stuff. But this dude is a freak athlete. He's an elite tier athlete. He can take it to the house from anywhere on the field. He can climb the ladder and sky for jump balls. He's very quick to snap down and break into and accelerate out of his breaks. This guy is going to make the Eagles pay if they lose track of him. They need to know where he's at on every snap of the game, right? But I would say this. I'm not sure if he is the most natural hands catcher, and I think his route running can still be improved, which is scary to think about, really. But this guy, you gotta take him away. You really have to take this guy away, or he will make you pay. But Eric, what did you think about Malik Nabers on film?
You mentioned it. They're using him inside and outside on motion all the time. You talked about a stat about how much he's being targeted, but specifically on motion, he has a historically high target rate because they're using him. We've seen this proliferation of these motions where they're still pretty much at full speed at the snap. If you just have a guy chasing him across the field and then he can go any direction from there, good luck. So he's getting targeted a ton in those scenarios. I specifically am thinking about him giving Quinyon issues on double moves because we know how eager he is to get an interception. He had multiple opportunities against the Browns. I actually laughed out loud when I saw him slamming the ground after him and CJ collided. I don't think we're going to take this guy away. He's going to get his yards for sure. But probably the main thing is, don't let him create giant plays after the catch. If you can get him down quickly or force him out of bounds, that's probably something you can live with. He is a lethal yards after catch threat. That's where it starts to get problematic if he's just busting big gains on you because of missed tackles and the like. So.
Yeah, that really reminds me of that Jaden Reed game in week 1. I'm having flashbacks to that. I could see something like that happening all over again with the speed and just the game-breaking ability that this guy has. Now, moving on to some of the other guys. I have to touch on this guy just real quick because I made a dedicated video about this guy, why the Eagles should draft this guy, and you're seeing it now. Tyrone Tracy, running back from the Giants. He should be their starting running back even when Devin Singletary comes back healthy. He just has more burst, more juice. The guys, for a guy that didn't play a ton of running back in his career in college, he has very solid vision. And he's versatile too. The guy can play. They started lining him up much more all over the field last week, and he didn't play a lot of pass snaps in the first game. So we're seeing an increased role from him. I wonder if that continues for Tracy as the season progresses. He just has too much juice. And this is a team that needs more weapons. He's a guy that can bring something to this offense. But looking at our weekly segment of who is blocking Jalen Carter, and this week it is Greg Van Roten. You know who that guy is, right? Well, I will say this. It's not the worst player that Jalen Carter has gone against this season, but this should be a matchup that Jalen Carter is able to win on a consistent basis. Now, looking at some of the other guys on the offensive line, we really need to touch on who is playing left tackle because their star left tackle, Andrew Thomas, went down. And now there's talks about moving. They might move their right tackle to left tackle and then put in a backup, or they might put in just their backup, Josh Azudu, into left tackle and then just leave it how it is. Either way, that is a big, massive downgrade for this offensive line, especially we lost Jordan Mailata, right? That's a big downgrade for us. But we have a good offensive line outside of Jordan Mailata. So you can weather those hits a little bit easier. The Giants don't have an offensive line as good as the Eagles. It is a better offensive line than they've had in years past. They've gone out and added some more veteran presence to this unit. But overall, it's not a great offensive line. And I think it, again, should be a setup for a good pass rush game again. But Eric, what did you think about who is going to be blocking Jalen Carter and then also who is going to be playing left tackle? Do you think it is going to be this backup, or do you think they're going to move the right tackle to left tackle?
Well, it's part of the reason that I think they're putting such an emphasis on getting the ball out quick, decisively, and a lot of underneath stuff. If you trust your O-line to hold up for 4 or 5 seconds, then you do dial up those shot plays. So I think, the writing is on the wall. They were not good. Period, when I watched them on film. And that was when they had Andrew Thomas. I think the interior has lots of issues. So I really hope we lean on some of those inside stunts that we had some success with last week. I would expect them to have success with that this week as well as bringing the nickel on a blitz. That's always going to challenge the line when they're sliding. So
Yeah, and their center has given up one of the higher pressure rates per snap in the league. So there is a matchup that you might be able to take advantage of there with some exotic looks. But looking at some game plan thoughts, you know what, Eric? I think I want to kick this one over to you because you've brought this specific coverage up in the past. I was wondering, what were your game plan thoughts? Because I think I have an idea of where you're going to go with this one.
okay, I didn't write down a specific coverage. Now, for anyone who follows me on Twitter, I'm now committing to like putting one blitz per week because I predicted a blitz that Fangio ended up running against the Browns to some success. So definitely we have to key in on Nabers. That's obvious. Um, don't let Daniel Jones hit his first read or make easy completions. They have some nice designs where they'll run a play action, but then they'll get a quick dump off screen. And if you just leave the running back alone, that can be a big gain. So don't let them hit the easy button. If he has to make tight window throws in the intermediate or deep parts of the field consistently to beat us, I don't like their chances of being able to do that. And despite Nabers being pretty much amazing, I actually don't think he's that good in contested catch scenarios. Now, he has had a few spectacular catches where he skied up for the ball, but looking back to his college career and some luck factored into some of those catches, and some of our DBs like Quinyon being able to go up the ladder, I think that's a favorable situation for us. That's kind of how I would try to limit their offense. I'm not scared of the run game for reasons we mentioned before. One blitz, I should mention the blitz here, which is it's a penny fire zone. Essentially, you have 5 men on the line, so you can use this on early downs. We've seen how much success the Eagles have had with their 5-man fronts. And you're bringing the middle linebacker. So basically, you have 2 guys straight up the gut, the nose tackle and the linebacker. And then you're basically like rolling a safety down and playing like a cover 3 behind it, or you can play other shells behind it. This is something that I think would be successful.
Man, I was really trying to set you up because you mentioned this coverage on a number of occasions already in this season. I think you talked about it when we were facing the Bucks with Mike Evans, but roll luggage with Nabers, right? So that targeted coverages to try and take away Nabers. So roll luggage is a coverage where essentially based on where the receiver is lined up, the coverage is going to change, right? So if the receiver is outside at number 1, you're going to play cover 2 on that side of the field. So you have a deep safety help over top, and then you have a corner playing underneath, right? So it allows you to target him without having to specifically double team him. But Fangio will also run variations where they will straight up double team guys or they will bracket them. Specifically calls 1 double jersey number. Malik Nabers' jersey number is 1, so 1 double 1 is essentially what the play call would be. All it's saying is we're going to double team Malik Nabers. Again, we need to do what we can to take away Malik Nabers. Running these targeted coverages and trying to force the ball to go somewhere else is what we need to do. Are they still going to force the ball to Nabers? Yes. But we can do things to help force the ball to go other directions as well. And when you look at Nabers on the coverages that he is targeted on the most, guess what? Cover 1's the coverage where he's targeted on by far the most. But when they face cover 6, when they face cover 4, the ball starts going other places. Did you want to jump in, Eric?
Yeah, real quick on that. I did really sit down and think about what pressures I thought would be most effective. And we didn't touch on him, but Wan'Dale Robinson is a slot where if you get him on one of our safeties or even DeJean in man coverage and space, that could be trouble. We've obviously talked about Nabers ad nauseum. So I would lean more into the zone pressures. Listen, there's a million different ones. They all have different reasons they could be successful. The reason I talked about the one in the Browns is because it seemed obvious they would slide to Carter, so then you could get a free rusher off the edge, and that actually materialized. But just to put a bow on it, I'm fine living with 5, running some more base fronts against the Giants. just make life hard on them. And you still have the ability to run some pressures out of those looks. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Wandale Robinson. We do need to talk on him. We talked about it on the pregame show, and it just we skipped right past him. He is a guy that is going to get a lot of targets as well. He gets a lot of targets in this offense. It's pretty much Neighbors, and then next is Wandale Robinson. He really is oftentimes an extension of their run game. He is spamming underneath routes and just collecting catches. So if you play fantasy in a PPR format, not a half point PPR, full point PPR, Wandale Robinson is going to be a solid piece because he's going to catch like 7 passes a game for like 30 yards. He's going to consistently get you those like 10 points a game. And then when Neighbors goes down, then he ends up getting like 15 targets a game, even though it's all underneath. Anyway, back to one last thing on game plan thoughts. I do want to make sure that, listen, they're going to help their backup offensive lineman, whether that is chipping him, sliding to him, maybe sliding and chipping, right? But whatever they do is going to give you an opportunity to attack with certain pressures the opposite way, whether it is pressures or simulated pressure where you're dropping an extra guy out into coverage and bringing pressure from the opposite side, or you're running certain stunts to take advantage of whichever way they're sliding. I think there is an opportunity to design some blitzes and some pressures to get after this offensive line, especially when you know they're probably going to have to help whoever that backup offensive lineman is. Now, switching to the defensive side of the ball, this defense is led by defensive coordinator Shane Bowen, who is in his first year with the team, although he was the former defensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans last year. It's headlined by names like Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns, and they're 10th in points per game allowed, 10th in yards per game allowed, 15th in EPA per play allowed, and first in sacks total. So, Eric, what did you see from this Giants defense?
they play slightly more than the league average of single high coverages. And then they have a changeup that they go to pretty often into, I would call it mid to longer passing downs, which is quarters, where they're actually the best defense in the NFL in that specific coverage, because it gives them their pass rushers the ability to really pin their ears back. And you mentioned it, they lead the league in sacks. They have good interior and outside rushers. That's really the key. It's something I'm a borderline obsessed with, is the pass rush is an organism that has to work in unison or just cohesively. One of the major issues last year with the Eagles was everyone just doing their own thing, which gives the quarterback pockets to step up into or escape. And the Giants do a good job of that. It helps when you have Dexter Lawrence, who pretty much collapses the pocket almost every single play. A lot of talk about like pass rush moves. It's so funny how he plays, where he kind of just leans forward, chops his feet really fast, and then just automatically pushes the guy back every time. And one of the specific thing I noted about their quarters coverage is you'll see their middle defenders gain depth like no other. Like they're gaining, and they're saying, you're not going to throw that 15-yard dig behind me no matter what. I think in part that has some reason why they've been so successful to that, taking away some of the intermediate crossers over the middle of the field. But Jalen doesn't throw there anyway, so that maybe not a big deal. Now, it does have one vulnerability, which is you can get dump offs in the flat and potentially run for big yardage. I hope we embrace that. It's something I talk about often, which is I see guys on film where it'd be like, oh, if you just dumped it off, Saquon could have ran for a first down. Let's just get that going a little bit. One tendency I noticed is pretty much their blitzes come exclusively from single high. They're not blitzing from cover 2 and cover 4 looks hardly ever. And they doubled the league average in the percentage of snaps in dime. Roughly 17%, whereas league average is around 8. So that it's just notable with their personnel packages. Like, if you have such a good defensive line, that can kind of allow you to put a bunch of defensive backs out there. They need it, because we'll get into it more, that they lack a lot of talent on the secondary. So that's kind of what I saw scheme wise. How about for you?
Yeah, I mean, same things. A good amount of man coverage. So, I mean, this could be another potential AJ Brown game. But like you said, they will mix in other coverages, right? Like quarters, and a good amount of cover three. It's somewhat similar to that Robert Saleh tree where they play a lot of cover one, a lot of quarters, right? So that's what we're gonna see from this team. Like you said, they take away big plays. They're seventh best in passing yards per play, but because of sacks, that drops their net yard, right? But if you remove sacks, they're actually 20th in yards per attempt. So you can pass the ball against this team as well. It's just that those sack numbers, when they're weighted and take compared against the total passing numbers, drops their yards per pass play down. Their completion percentage is 30th in the league, 71.4%. The Eagles are 61% for comparison. So all the we talk about how much the Eagles give up easy passes. The Giants are giving that up at a much higher rate than the Eagles are. So this should be a game where they can keep the clock moving, keep possession, and keep their defense off the field and help them out, right? Especially when you look at the fact that they faced the most light boxes against the run, or they have used the most light boxes against the run of any defense in the NFL. They're 31st in yards per carry and 32nd in broken and missed tackles percent on run plays, right? But they're fifth highest in pass rate faced, which I thought was interesting. They're really bad at stopping the run, but teams are passing at them at an extremely high rate, and I'm not really sure why. But they also have a low blitz rate. Next Gen Stats and PFF have different metrics in terms of their blitz rate, but both of their blitz rates are pretty low. I think Next Gen Stats has them around middle of the pack, but PFF has them pretty low. I think that's because Next Gen Stats uses just almost exclusively like GPS tracking, so sometimes their stats are a little off. But they will get exotic. Their safety has 3 sacks, so even though they don't blitz a lot, they will send some exotic blitzes, and they'll send blitzes in ways to where you can tell what they're trying to do is get Dexter Lawrence matched up one-on-one against the center. That's the whole point of their blitz, and it works. So that's just what I thought scheme-wise. Now jumping into some of the defensive player matchups, we got to talk about it. Dexter Lawrence. The dude is a beast. We do need to mention he didn't practice today, which is, well, when we were recording, which is Wednesday night. So he didn't practice first day of the week. So we'll need to pay attention to that. I didn't see anything in the game to make me think he had a major injury. It might just be rest for a long season. But I think he's a top 2 defensive tackle in the league. I think it is Chris Jones, and then I think it's Dexter Lawrence. I think Quinnen Williams is really good, and everyone knows I love Jalen Carter. But the top 2 guys right now, Chris Jones and Dexter Lawrence. And then the thing about Dexter Lawrence is he is doing this as a nose tackle. All these sacks he's getting is as a nose tackle. That is significantly harder to get these sacks than when you're playing as a 3 technique, rushing off the just off the guard, right? Because now you're being put in a position where it's very easy to double team you. He deals with a ton of double teams, and he's still a very hard guy to stop, right? And the run game, pass game, it doesn't really matter. He's a mammoth of a human. You talked about it. He just pushes guys into the backfield. He doesn't need a whole bunch of pass rush moves because his pass rush move of power works. You don't need anything else if your go-to move works. And he just spams it over and over and over again. Listen, he is a guy that needs to be slowed down. We're going to talk about some of the other guys in a minute, but when it comes to their pass rush, Dexter Lawrence is a guy that needs to be stopped. And Cam Jurgens versus Lawrence is the matchup to watch on this offensive line. And they're going to try and figure out ways to get Lawrence against Jurgens. It'll be one to watch. But what do you think about Dexter Lawrence?
You know, it was the same thing last year, but he just wasn't able to convert his a million pressures into sacks. This year he is. So his numbers are going way up. I don't even know if I can remember a time that there's been a guy who lines up from where he lines up and is able to get as many quarterback hits as he does. It's literally incredible. And we talked about it now. There's almost no moves to speak of. So it's like, good luck. I mean, short of double teaming him with some strong guys, you're pretty much going to get beat time and time again. And, you know, it's not necessarily that he's going to get a sack every time, but if he's pushing Becton or Jurgens, whoever it is, directly back into Hurts, we've seen it. That's when Hurts throws his interceptions. He can't step into the throw. He has to loft it a little bit higher. His arm hits the back of them. That's when he throws the interception. So it's something we got to be mindful of. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to move Becton over to left tackle. I think Fred Johnson can fill that role. leave Becton there at right guard because
Yeah.
one of the things he does. Okay.
Yeah. We'll touch on this when we get to the game plan section.
Okay.
We'll touch on that when we get there. Yeah. But let's jump to some of the other guys. And I think the reason why he is starting to convert some more of these pressures into sacks is the fact that he has better guys around him this year in terms of his pass rushers. They brought in Brian Burns in the offseason, a big blockbuster move. I will say this. I'll start with this. He was also did not participate in practice on Wednesday as well, right? So we need to pay attention to that. But I'll say this. Brian Burns is a good player. Is he worth the money he got? I don't know about that. A lot of Eagles fans are, when I look online, the stuff I'm seeing about him is they have this fear about him like he is like a Micah Parsons or a Myles Garrett or a TJ Watt type of pass rusher. Listen, he will make you pay if you give him the opportunity, but he's been more of like a good pass rusher than an elite pass rusher. When you look at his pressure rates, he's been around the 30s for much of his career. He's 40th in pressure rate this year. He has one season with double-digit sacks, and this is a guy that went out and got traded for and then given a $30 million contract. I think there was a reason why the Panthers are okay letting Brian Burns walk at his young age. This is a different scenario than when we let Hassan Reddick walk, because Hassan Reddick, his contract wouldn't have kicked in until he was 30. Brian Burns is a young guy, and they still were like, you know what? We don't think he's actually worth that kind of money. So to me, I thought that was just a tell right there. And then you look at, he hasn't been down that dominant player that is worth a $30 million a year contract. So we'll see. Now, I know people will say that Panthers organization is horrible. You look what they've done with the moves they made, trading away CMC, a lot of the stuff that they did was with their previous ownership. This new ownership is having to make fixes for what the previous ownership did. So I know some people will be like, well, this management sucks, which is why they gave away Brian Burns. They can't evaluate talent. This is a different management that got him into this place that they're in currently. So I will also say this as well. He is a good run defender. He is 15th in run stop percentage. He's not like a Cam Jordan kind of guy that's going to knock you back and constrict run gaps. He's going to beat you more with quickness, knifing into the backfield, swimming around run blocks. Very similar to Hassan Reddick's style of play. Whole flip sides of the field. He generally, I think he's rushing about 60% of the time off of right tackles. That's probably going to flip this week with Fred Johnson playing at left tackle. But he will also play off-ball linebacker as well. And I think there's situations where you can get him. We'll talk about that in the game plan, how we can take advantage of that. But Eric, what did you think of Brian Burns?
I agree with you. I think he's good, not great. And I think the perception, perhaps by some fans, of him being elite comes from how aesthetic his play is and his build. Like he's a very impressive looking player who has awesome highlights. And you mentioned it, down to down, it's just not there. I'd rather a guy who hits a double every play than strikes out a bunch and then hits a home run, kind of like what the Phillies did. So that's kind of how I'd encapsulate Burns' game. And, listen, you put a backup tackle out there, that's something you got to worry about. You definitely want to put stuff in your game plan to help with that. But I definitely don't view him as a game wrecker like some of these other elite pass rushers.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the aesthetic play. When he wins quick, right? So when you see him with all these quick wins, it's like, wow, this is one of the best pass rushers in the league, and he is a good pass rusher. But it's just, like you said, sometimes he does disappear, especially against guys that don't let him win with his speed. You know who doesn't let him do that? Lane Johnson. But I doubt he goes against Lane Johnson a whole lot this week. Now, moving on to Azeez Ojulari. He actually leads the Giants in pressure rate this season. But he is 35th in pressure rate. So it's not like they have a guy that is like Myles Garrett type of dominance. Not that there is a ton of Myles Garretts walking around Earth, but I don't think this is like, they're a solid edge rush group. And when you compare them to the Eagles group, yes, it's probably an upgrade over the Eagles group, but this isn't a group that scares me all that much. And if Mailata was playing, I wouldn't be all that concerned from their edge rushers. But do you have anything to add about Ojulari?
Well, I specifically about how they rush. They kind of form like this cone as they rush around the quarterback, which I'll specifically note that if Jalen tries to bail, that's not going to work. I saw specific plays in the Seahawks game where Geno Smith was able to either run up the middle and gash them or step up into a void directly in the middle and throw it downfield for a big completion. So I think that's going to come into play if Hurts gets into some of his old habits of fading and bailing out to the outside. I think that could be problematic. But yeah, Ojulari is an underrated player. You have these other guys get so much attention. I think that's also a part of the reason that he's had his success.
Yeah, definitely. And with Jalen, this is something we'll talk about a little bit more. I'm gonna have a betting episode come out pretty soon here, and we're gonna touch on some of Jalen's stats. Jalen's now starting to, if you look at his scramble rates, like his non-pressure scramble rates, his pressured scramble rates, they're starting to drop, especially from earlier in his career. So I think there are some signs that he is hanging in the pocket a little bit more. There are still obviously times where he is bailing the pocket where we'd probably like him to stay in there. But you know what? He's taking the positive strides that I've been hoping that he would start taking, right? So I'm enjoying seeing that and seeing that in the numbers and seeing that start to play out on the field. And hopefully that continues to progress as he progresses throughout his career. Now, looking at their secondary, you said it. This secondary isn't all that great. Talent-wise, I do think their top corner, Deonte Banks, I think he is a talented player. He's still just a young player. He does need to put it all together, but he has talent to be a good player. He just is waiting to figure it all out. They will move him around, and his yards per cover snap right now really is not very good. It's 97th out of 115 qualifying corners, and his yards per target is 96 out of 115th, right? So why is yards per cover snap important? It's important because, number one, how many yards you're giving up per snap is directly going to correlate with how many receptions and how many yards you're giving up, right? But per snap, really, if you have a low yards per coverage snap, that's an indication that teams aren't targeting you. When you see that you have a high yards per cover snap, that's an indication that teams are targeting you at a very high rate, which is why I also threw in the yards per target, because you do need to separate out a little bit. Is the high yards per cover snap because he's getting targeted a lot? Or is it partly due to the fact that he's giving up a lot of yards when he is targeted? It turns out that this is just a combination of both. He's getting targeted a lot. He's giving up a lot of passes. That tells you right there what NFL teams think about Deonte Banks and where he's at right now. I don't think they will get into situations where they are going to run man coverage. They will move him around. He followed T. Higgins around last week. Does he follow around Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown? If he does, I'm targeting that matchup and those situations where we feel like we probably got them in man coverage. But did you have anything else to add about Banks or anyone else in the secondary?
Yeah, you make a great point. In a way, they're using him as if he is like a Patrick Surtain, but he's not. And the thing is, he's still the most talented player in that secondary, but that shows you how little talent they have in that secondary. And yeah, I mean, we saw it. The Eagles were testing Denzel Ward one-on-one with Devontae Smith, testing Greg Newsome and Emerson against A.J. Brown one-on-one, not even batting an eye, throwing go balls down the sideline. I mean, if they did that and then they see Deonte Banks, they're going after him for sure. So that's going to be a central part of the game plan. I'm sure of it.
I did want to touch on Tyler Nubin as well. He was a ball hawk in college. This dude was amazing, right? So I would watch out for him. Just being a guy that can come in and just jump a route that you just, if you misplace and aren't sure where he is, I think he's a guy that can come and create a turnover. But they only have one interception this year. The Giants defense does. So they haven't created a lot of turnovers. Part of that is the fact that they just aren't challenging guys all that much. They're really trying to let you just mess up yourself and make you drive the length of the field. So that's part of the reason they haven't gotten a whole lot of turnovers. But as we wrap this up, moving to the game plan thoughts for this offense. What did you think that this offense needs to do to attack this Giants defense?
Stay ahead of the sticks so they don't have to face that quarters defense where the pass rushers pin their ears back. Don't bail from the pocket, because I talked about the shape of their pass rush. They really get the edges going vertically upfield pretty good, and unless you cut under that and then out, you're not going to really have an escape lane. Test their DBs in favorable matchups. Like you said, they play cover one. You're going to get Smith and Brown on guys who cannot cover them. Even if they're tightly covered, they might come down with the ball anyway. And double team Lawrence consistently. If you put him I want to talk about this real quick. One of the good things about Becton is he has unbelievable strength. That may mitigate Lawrence's effectiveness to some degree, where maybe you don't need a true double team. Maybe Juergens can just give him a little pop and then look for work. But that's kind of what I would do to attack the defense. You don't need to reinvent the wheel because they're not that talented overall.
Yeah, and like you said to start the show, just play good football, good fundamental football. Be clean, be crisp, be on the same page. Just have a good plan and play together, and that should be enough with the talent we have to win this game. But in specific, run the ball. Number one, wear out the pass rush. You can run the ball against this team. We said this last week, and then they didn't run the ball very well. I will say the Browns probably also realized that the Eagles wanted to run the ball, so they came out and they blitzed a shit ton. They blitzed Jalen at the highest rate he had been blitzed at the whole season. They were selling out to stop the run. There were times their safeties were like 8 yards off the line of scrimmage. So they pretty much said, we know you want to run the ball. We're not going to let you run the ball. Okay. So sometimes that stuff does happen. The Giants don't play that way. The Giants play with a lot of light boxes. Now, could they change that up? Sure. But the Browns played with a ton of stacked boxes coming into the game. So we knew that about them as a team coming into the game, right? Do the Giants change their stripes and all of a sudden become a team that's stacking the box at a much higher rate? That's something we'll have to see. And maybe it changes with this game if Saquon's wearing them out, because this very well should be a Saquon revenge game. This should be the game playing in MetLife where Saquon gets to stick it to all those fans that were hating on him all offseason, saying that he left the team, that he didn't give him a chance and all this, and then all the facts came out of what happened, So when we look at some of the other stuff that they can do as well, early downs, we talked about this. I talked about this with Brian Burns. He will drop into coverage. You remember last year when we played the Cardinals and they kept forcing Hassan Reddick to drop into coverage by coming out in heavy personnel, 12 and 13 personnel. Then they had to line and spread formations, and then it forced Hassan Reddick to have to guard a receiver and coverage. Do that same thing to the Giants. I would come out in 12 personnel on early downs, and then I'd spread them out. And we saw Kellen Moore do this. Great example of this. His first game with the Chargers last year, he gets a linebacker matched up with Keenan Allen one-on-one, and he runs a wheel route. Just same thing I'm talking about here. You start with 12 personnel under center, shift to empty, then you got the matchup you want. That's something I would try to take advantage of. Add to that, I would stay patient taking shots. They will come, but you can't force it. Like I said, they will play a lot of off coverage. They will entice you to throw it underneath, but they will also play cover one when they need to. Those are the times where I think you can take those shots to A.J. Brown down the field. Last thing I will say about game plan thoughts, and we have to talk about this, is the offensive line. And what do we think they're going to do with injury? There's a lot of talk around Twitter, Eagles Twitter land, that they should move Becton to left tackle, put Steen at right guard, and solve the issue that way. What are your thoughts on that?
We talked about it earlier. Becton, his superpower is strength, which can neutralize Lawrence to some degree. And he has really bad foot speed, which exposes him on the edge, especially against a guy like Burns. So that just doesn't make sense to me at all. I'm going to put Fred Johnson out there. I'm going to give him a little bit of help. And then I'm going to stick Becton where he's comfortable. That would be my plan. How about for you?
Exactly that. Same thing with what you said. What you don't want to... Listen, is Fred Johnson the best tackle in the world? No. But you know what? Who also wasn't? Mekhi Becton. There's a reason he signed to be a backup for the Eagles and is now playing guard. He was not good at tackle. He did not have the range. And if you want to go out there and put him against Brian Burns in space, good fucking luck. That is the worst matchup possible that you could do. So leave him where he's at. Put Fred Johnson out there. And then what you can do, if your 4 offensive linemen are solid, then you can go and it makes it much easier to help when you have one guy that you need to help on. But if you're moving one guy to fix an area and then you're weaker in another area and you're making everything worse, it just makes everything worse. And at offensive line, I know because of Madden, we see these ratings and you think you can just plug in one guy here and you can plug him in there and he's just the same anywhere. That is not how offensive line works. When you look at Jeff Stoutland and some of the clinics that he's done and the amount of time he's talked about what they do in practice, some coaches spend a ton of time working in shoots. Some coaches spend a ton of time working with the sleds and the bags. Stoutland, he has his offensive line working combination blocks consistently all day long because he knows how important it is to build that chemistry with your offensive line. Let's talk about other stuff too. Stunts, twists, pressures, pickups, different looks that defenses can give you. All that stuff takes time to develop and build together and mesh together. When you start changing a bunch of different pieces on an offensive line, it makes everything worse. And even if you have talented pieces, those talented pieces will play worse when they don't play together, right? So you don't want to get into these situations where you're moving a whole bunch of guys around. And really, it's not that hard to take away edge rushers if you sit there and you chip them and give these guys some help. I think we can survive with Fred Johnson at left tackle in this matchup if you give him just a little bit of help. I think fans are remembering Jack Driscoll just getting whooped left and right. In the Jets game, in the Saints game in 2022, Fred Johnson's better than him. He's giving up a lot of pressures right now. It's more so pressures where he's kind of getting pushed into the pocket and the pocket's getting a little tighter, but he's finding his anchor late. So that is keeping Jalen clean for the most part. The vast majority of his pressures are hurries and not quarterback hits and sacks. He's given up a few, but the vast majority of the pressures he is giving up is just finding his anchor late. You can live with that. As long as Jalen knows that the pocket might get tight late, he can live with that. So I think just leave things how they are, put Fred Johnson at left tackle, and I think they'll be fine. Now, as we wrap this up, let's jump to some score predictions. Eric, how do you think this game plays out?
I have the Eagles winning 27-20. Now, I think they'll finally be able to, with all their weapons there, facing a mediocre to below mediocre defense, they'll be able to put some points on the board. And, I think the Giants, they'll get like two big splash plays that'll end up kind of elevating their score higher than they end up playing down to down. I don't think they're going to like consistently put together scoring drives, but I do expect them to get a couple big plays. Including, I think we might have, I just for some reason have a premonition that we're going to have a brutal turnover. We were turnover free last week. But yeah, I think we're better than them by enough of a margin that we'll be able to overcome some bad variance or bad luck. So I feel pretty optimistic about this game. How about for you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more of a low-scoring game. Not too much different than the score that you had, but offensively, the Giants don't give up a ton of big plays on defense. I think the Eagles can hit one here or there, especially if they find a situation where they can get A.J. Brown one-on-one in man coverage. But they don't give up a ton of big plays on defense. They really entice you to throw underneath and to run the ball. That leads to higher completion percentage. That leads to longer drives. That leads to a running clock and a shortened game. And they've been annoying enough on defense to not give up huge games. So I don't think we necessarily go out there and light the scoreboard up. But defensively, the Giants' offense has struggled to move the ball and score. They should get Nabers back, which will help. But Andrew Thomas goes down, which means the pressure rate will go back up again. And the Eagles have held both non-top 10 teams to under 20 points. And the Eagles defense gets to face another non-top 10 offense this week. And again, the Eagles defense also entices underneath throwing and running the ball. So that also further, keeps the clock running on both sides. So for that reason, I think this is going to be a lower scoring game, 24-17, coming under the 43-point over-under point total. But that will be it for us this week. We will be back next week to review what is hopefully another victory pod. But make sure to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.